Jake, I gave you everything. My blood, my sweat, my life. And this is how you repay me? My voice cracked as the storm outside battered against the windows of my study. Jake didn't flinch. He leaned back in my leather chair, his face calm, almost arrogant. You built an empire, Dad. But empires don't last forever. I'm just taking what's mine. For a moment, silence hung in the room. My chest tightened. My own son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, was now looking at me as if I was nothing more than an obstacle in his path. Before I take you deeper into this painful story of betrayal and revenge, don't forget to subscribe if you believe that justice always finds a way. I was never born into wealth. Every brick of my company, every client, every contract, I fought for it with sleepless nights and sweat-soaked shirts. When Jake was born, I swore I'd never let him struggle like I did. He would have the best schools, the best house, the best start in life. When he turned 12, I brought him to my construction sites. Look around, son, I told him. One day, all this will be yours. But remember, trust is the only foundation that never cracks. He smiled, nodded, and said, I'll never let you down, Dad. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. It started small. A client called, complaining about delays in payment. My accountant whispered that Jake had authorized some early withdrawals for his projects. I brushed it aside. He was young, ambitious. I told myself he'd learn. But ambition, I would later learn, can turn into poison. Soon, Jake stopped coming to family dinners. His friends were wealthy, ruthless men in sharp suits, men who saw loyalty as weakness. One night, my wife Sarah asked, Do you trust him with the company, Michael? I answered too quickly, He's my son. Of course, I do. If only I had listened to her doubts. It was a cold morning when my lawyer rushed into my office. Michael, there's been a transfer order. Jake has filed documents, he's moving the controlling shares into his name. My hands went numb. I picked up the papers. My own son had plotted with board members, forged documents, and turned loyal managers against me. That night, I confronted him. He didn't deny it. Dad, the time is over. You built the empire. Now it's mine. You should be proud I'm strong enough to take it. I stared at him, my heart breaking. Jake, this isn't strength. This is betrayal. His reply cut like a blade. Betrayal? No. It's survival. Within weeks, I was stripped of power. My accounts frozen. The company I had built was suddenly under Jake's control. To make it worse, I fell sick of a heart attack that left me weak and bedridden. As I lay in the hospital, tubes running through my veins, I overheard him whispering to my lawyer. Transfer the will. Everything should be in my name. Dad won't last long. That was the moment the pain turned into fire. If my son wanted war, he would have it. Lying in that sterile hospital bed, I realized I had made one mistake my entire life. I trusted blindly. But betrayal has a strange way of sharpening your mind. As Jake celebrated his victory by parading himself as the new CEO, I quietly began to work with the one person he had underestimated, my old lawyer, Richard. Richard had been with me since the beginning. He knew my heart, but more importantly, he knew my fears. Michael, he whispered one night by my bedside, you told me years ago to prepare for every possibility. Do you remember? I nodded weakly. Well, Richard smiled, you signed a contingency one Jake doesn't know about. If he pushes too far, the empire won't be his. It will slip through his fingers. A surge of strength coursed through me. My son thought I was finished. He had no idea that I had already written the final chapter. I played the role of the broken man perfectly. I let Jake think I was too weak to fight back. Meanwhile, Richard and I quietly restructured hidden assets, funneled shares into a trust, and secured alliances with old business partners Jake had alienated. At the same time, I reached out to Daniel, Jake's childhood best friend. Unlike my son, Daniel had grown into a man of integrity. He had always admired me as a father figure. "Daniel," I said, my voice raspy, "will you help me expose Jake?" Without hesitation, he nodded. "He betrayed you, sir." "That means he betrayed me too." Together, we built the plan. Every empire has cracks, and Jake's arrogance was the biggest crack of all. While I plotted in the shadows, Jake was shining in the spotlight. Newspapers ran headlines, "Young CEO reshapes empire." He threw parties that burned millions in a single night. He bought penthouses, luxury cars, and surrounded himself with people who praised him, people who would disappear the moment his fortune slipped. But his greed grew faster than his empire. He cut corners, bribed inspectors, cheated clients. And whispers began to spread, "The son isn't like the father. He's reckless. Dangerous." Jake didn't care. One evening, he even visited me in the hospital, not with compassion, but mockery. "How does it feel, Dad?" he smirked. "To watch your kingdom in my hands? To know your era is over?" I stayed silent. Revenge tastes sweeter when served in silence. The turning point came when Jake tried to sell off the very house his mother loved, the house she had decorated with her own hands. Sarah confronted him. "This house is not yours to sell, Jake. It's your father's heart." But Jake pushed her aside. "Mother, everything is mine now. Even you should understand that." That night, Sarah came to my hospital bed with tears in her eyes. "Michael, he's not our son anymore. He's a stranger. Promise me you'll stop him." Her pain became my final fuel. I promised her, not just as a husband, but as a father, that Jake would pay for every wound he had carved into our family. With Daniel's help, we gathered evidence, forged signatures, bribery trails, secret recordings of Jake admitting to fraud. Every piece was a nail in his coffin. But evidence wasn't enough. Jake was cunning. He had powerful allies. So, I played the one card he never expected: humility. I called a family meeting and invited Jake. When he arrived, arrogant as ever, I said, "Son, I admit defeat. You've taken everything. But allow me one last dignity to amend my will in your presence." His eyes gleamed. "Finally, Dad. You're ready to hand it all over." What he didn't know was that Richard was already preparing the final twist. Weeks later, when my health had slightly improved, the family gathered in the lawyer's office. Jake walked in, confident, smirking at everyone. The lawyer opened the will. His voice steady, he read. "To my son Jake, I leave the lessons he chose to ignore. To my wife Sarah and my trusted allies, I leave the company, the assets, and every empire I built." The room froze. Jake's smirk vanished. His face turned pale, his lips trembling. What is this?" Richard looked up. "A will your father signed years ago. Ironclad. Legal. Unbreakable." Jake's hands shook. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. And for the first time, I smiled. Jake stormed out of the lawyer's office that day, his face red with fury. I could almost hear his thoughts: how dare my father humiliate me like this? But what he didn't realize was that humiliation was only the beginning. Within weeks, news began to spread. Investors grew nervous. Partners who had once trusted him suddenly pulled back. The reason? Daniel had begun leaking small but deadly pieces of evidence, invoices that didn't add up, recordings of Jake bragging about bribes, testimonies from employees he had mistreated. Each headline was a dagger. CEO accused of fraud. Company founder's son under investigation. Empire at risk. Jake thought he was untouchable. Now, the world was beginning to doubt him. I was still weak, but I knew timing was everything. So, when I appeared in public for the first time after months in the hospital, it wasn't at a party or a press conference. It was at a charity event my late wife had always loved. The cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. "Mr. Michael, are you reclaiming your company?" I smiled softly. "I'm just here to honor my wife's legacy. The company will decide for itself who deserves to lead it." Those words were deliberate. They weren't a direct attack, they were a seed. A seed that whispered to the world, Jake doesn't deserve it. Sarah had been quiet for months, bearing the shame of her son's betrayal. But now she couldn't hold back. At a family dinner, she stood, her hands trembling. "Jake, you destroyed your father's trust. You sold his values for greed. Do you know what people call you now? The spoiled prince." Jake slammed his fist on the table. "Enough, mother." But Sarah didn't flinch. "No, Jake. It's not enough until you lose everything. That's the only way you'll understand what you've done to this family." Her words cut deeper than mine ever could. A mother's disappointment is heavier than any courtroom sentence. By now, the government had taken notice. Auditors raided Jake's offices, investigators questioned his staff, and his inner circle began to crumble. The media painted him as a villain. Talk shows debated, did the son betray the father for money? Documentaries aired clips of my old interviews, comparing my discipline with Jake's recklessness. The contrast was brutal and effective. Everywhere Jake went, people whispered. Strangers spat at the ground when he passed. Former friends turned their backs. For the first time, my son tasted isolation. One night, past midnight, Jake barged into my home. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes disheveled. He looked less like a king and more like a beggar. "Dad," he croaked, "please, stop this. I'll give it all back. Just tell them I'm innocent." I stared at him for a long moment. This was the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The boy I once promised to protect. But the man standing before me? He had destroyed everything I loved. "Jake," I said coldly, "I didn't destroy you. Your greed did. And now, you must live with it." His knees buckled. He sank to the floor, sobbing. For the first time in years, he looked like my son again, broken, lost, desperate. But it was too late. The court hearings began. Every witness, every document, every recording painted the same picture, a man consumed by greed, blind to loyalty, deaf to reason. I sat quietly in the courtroom, never once raising my voice. The evidence spoke for me. The final verdict thundered through the room. Jacob Michelson, guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate misconduct. Sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Gasps filled the room. Sarah clutched my hand tightly. Jake's face turned white. He looked at me, his eyes wide, as if silently screaming, "Dad, save me." But I didn't move. This was Karma, the son who betrayed his father, now chained by his own sins. After the trial, reporters surrounded me. "Mr. Michael, what do you feel about your son's sentence?" I paused, then spoke the truth. "I feel sorrow. Not because he lost the empire, but because he lost himself. Let this be a reminder, wealth without values destroys not just empires, but families." The clip went viral. Millions watched. Parents showed it to their children. Sons saw it as a warning. Fathers saw it as a battle cry. And deep down, I knew my revenge was complete. The first night in prison changed Jake. Gone were the silk suits, the flashy watches, the arrogant smile. In their place stood a man stripped to gray prison clothes, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped. Inside, he wasn't the CEO. He wasn't the prince. He was just another inmate, another number. Other prisoners had read the headlines. Some mocked him. "So, you're the billionaire son who stole from his own father? How's that working out for you?" Jake's pride, once unshakable, shattered in their laughter. Every day inside was a reminder that betrayal carries a price. Sarah visited Jake once, only once. Behind the glass wall, she looked at her son, her baby, now broken. "Why, Jake?" she whispered through the phone. Jake pressed his forehead against the glass, tears streaming. "I thought I was proving myself, Mom. I thought if I had more, I'd finally be enough." Sarah shook her head. "You were always enough. But you traded love for greed." Her tears fell like rain. She dropped the phone and walked away. She never visited him again. A mother's love is endless, until it's crushed by betrayal. I didn't celebrate Jake's downfall. There were no parties, no champagne. Only silence. Because revenge isn't about joy, it's about justice. Instead, I poured my energy back into rebuilding what he had broken. With Daniel's help, the company stabilized. Old partners returned. Investors whispered, "The father has risen again." And when employees saw me walk through the office doors once more, they didn't just cheer, they cried. Because they knew the empire wasn't just a business. It was family. I began speaking at universities, conferences, even community centers. Not about wealth. Not about power. But about values. I told them, trust is not inherited. It is earned. Betrayal doesn't just wound the betrayed, it destroys the betrayer. Young men listened. Fathers nodded. Mothers wiped tears. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a warning to every family who thought betrayal couldn't touch them. One morning, I received a letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask for a chance to rebuild myself when I leave this place. I've lost everything, but I don't want to lose the chance to be your son again. Jake." I read the letter again and again. My hands trembled. Part of me wanted to rip it apart. Another part wanted to hold on to it forever. Betrayal cuts deep. But even deeper is the question every father must face: can I forgive? Years later, Jake walked out of prison. His hair was gray, his eyes weary. He was no longer the boy who mocked me, nor the man who stole from me. He was something in between, hungry, broken, searching. He approached me slowly, like a child afraid of punishment. "Dad," he whispered, "I don't deserve it, but will you give me a chance?" I studied him for a long moment. The silence felt like a dream. Then, softly, I said, "Jake, trust is earned. If you want it back, start now." Not with words, with actions. His tears fell, but this time, they weren't of pride or shame. They were of hope. Over time, Jake proved himself. He volunteered at charities, worked honest jobs, rebuilt relationships step by step. I didn't hand him back the empire. That chapter was closed. But I gave him something better, the chance to be a son again. And though the scars of betrayal would never fully fade, one truth remained. Revenge restored my honor. Forgiveness restored my soul. Jake's release from prison wasn't a headline. No cameras, no journalists, no applause. He walked out carrying a small bag, the weight of 12 years on his shoulders. He found work at a construction site. For the first time in his life, he earned money with sweat on his brow and blisters on his hands. Coworkers mocked him. A billionaire's son mixing cement? What a fall. But Jake stayed silent. Every insult was a reminder of who he used to be and who he never wanted to be again. I kept my distance at first. I wanted proof, not promises. So, I asked Daniel to keep an eye on him. One evening, Daniel came to my home, smiling. "Michael, he's changing. He works hard. Doesn't complain. He even helps the younger men on site." I raised an eyebrow. "And the old Jake?" Daniel chuckled. "Gone. Replaced by someone who finally understands humility." For the first time, I allowed a flicker of pride to return. Sarah resisted seeing Jake for years. Her wounds ran too deep. But one Sunday afternoon, she finally agreed. When she entered his small rented apartment, she froze. The man before her wasn't the arrogant son who mocked her love. He was thinner, older, eyes softened by suffering. "Mom," Jake whispered, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want to make you proud again." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as she pulled him into her arms. "My son was lost," she whispered, "but maybe he's found again." That embrace healed a wound deeper than prison ever could. I didn't return Jake to the company. That empire was no longer his to hold. But I gave him something else, a small foundation under my name. "Run this," I told him. "It won't make you rich. But it may make you worthy." He looked at me with wide eyes. "A second chance?" I nodded. "Not to be a king, but to be a man." And for the first time, Jake worked not for power, not for greed, but for purpose. Years passed. Jake built the foundation into something meaningful: schools for the poor, shelters for the homeless, support for broken families. Ironically, he became known not for betrayal, but for healing. One journalist asked him, "Why devote your life to this?" Jake answered quietly, "Because I destroyed my father once. Now, I want to honor him every day I breathe." His words reached me through the evening news. For the first time in decades, my heart felt lighter. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, my grandson, Jake's boy, ran up to me. "Grandpa," he asked, "is it true Dad was once bad?" I smiled softly. "Yes, son. He was. But more importantly, he learned. And that makes him stronger than before." The boy tilted his head. "So even if I make mistakes, I can fix them too?" I nodded, tears brimming. "Exactly. As long as you never forget that trust is the most precious thing a man can earn." And in that moment, I knew the story of betrayal had become the story of redemption. Not just for Jake, but for every generation after him. As the years drew on, my health weakened again. But this time, I wasn't afraid. Because I had seen the worst of betrayal, and I had lived long enough to witness redemption. On my final birthday, Jake stood before me not as a thief, not as a betrayer, but as my son. "Dad," he said, voice trembling, "thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." I smiled, whispering my last lesson. Revenge may punish the betrayer, but forgiveness saves the family. And with that, I closed my eyes, at peace. The day of the trial finally came. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with whispers like a restless hive. Neighbors, journalists, and even distant relatives had come to witness the storm that had been brewing in silence. At the center of it all was me, Michael, the man who had built an empire, only to be betrayed by his own blood. On one side sat Ethan, my son. He looked sharp in his suit, but his eyes carried a nervous flicker, betraying the confidence he was trying to project. His lawyers whispered strategies in his ear, while he avoided my gaze. I couldn't help but notice how his hand trembled every time he adjusted his tie. On the other side sat me, calm but firm. I had no need for dramatics. The truth was my armor, and the years of sacrifice I made for my family were my weapon. The judge entered, and the gavel struck, silencing the noise. Case number 2147, Michael versus Ethan, regarding corporate fraud, property theft, and breach of trust, the clerk announced. The trial began. Ethan's lawyer painted him as a misunderstood son who was merely trying to secure his inheritance early. He spoke with a polished tone, trying to make betrayal sound like a business decision. But then my lawyer rose. He didn't just argue, he told my story. He reminded everyone how I had started with nothing, how I had worked day and night to build the company, how I had raised Ethan with love and education, giving him the best opportunities money could buy. He spoke of the loyalty of my workers, the sweat behind every brick, the pain behind every dollar. And then he brought out the evidence. One by one, documents flashed on the screen, forged signatures, secret transfers, private emails where Ethan plotted with competitors to push me out. Gasps filled the courtroom. Ethan's confident smile cracked like glass under pressure. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up slowly, every eye locked on me. My voice was steady, heavy with the weight of years. I am not here because my son wanted what is mine. A father can forgive that. I am here because my son tried to erase me. He tried to make me disappear as if the years of my blood, sweat, and sacrifice meant nothing. He didn't just steal from me, he betrayed the trust that built this family. And no empire, no fortune, is worth more than that. The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan's face drained of color. The judge looked at him with piercing eyes. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Ethan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I deserved it. The gavel struck. The verdict was announced. Ethan was guilty. His assets were frozen, his shares stripped away, and the company was returned fully under my control. He would face time for fraud, and more importantly, the world now knew the truth. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, some in shock. But me? I felt no joy. Just a deep, aching sorrow. Because while justice had been served, nothing could erase the fact that the knife had come from my own son's hand. As I walked out of the courthouse, flashes from cameras blinded me, questions from reporters echoed all around. But in my heart, there was only one voice, the memory of the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy who used to call me Dad with pride. That boy was gone. And I had buried him today, not in a grave, but in the cold, merciless chambers of justice. The courtroom victory was mine, but as I stepped into the quiet night air outside, the weight on my chest was heavier than any battle I had ever fought. Justice had spoken, yes, but justice does not heal a father's broken heart. News channels blared the headline within minutes. Son betrays father in $50 million empire scandal, court rules in father's favor. The story spread like wildfire. Overnight, Ethan went from being the golden heir to the face of greed and betrayal. Business partners cut ties. Friends vanished. Even his girlfriend, who had been whispering in his ear all this time, dumped him as soon as his bank accounts were frozen. I watched all of this from a distance. Not with triumph, but with an ache that no medicine could cure. One evening, just a week after the trial, I received a letter. It was from Ethan. My hands trembled as I opened it. Dad, it read, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I thought I was proving myself. I thought building my own kingdom meant taking yours. But I see now I destroyed the only man who ever believed in me. I am not asking for another chance. I just want you to know I regret it. I regret it all. The letter ended with shaky handwriting, smudged with what looked like tears. For days, I couldn't sleep. Memories of Ethan as a child haunted me, the way he used to run to me after school, the way he once said, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. How had that boy turned into this man? Karma, however, was not done with him. Ethan's prison sentence came quickly. On his first night behind bars, he learned what betrayal truly felt like. Those he had called friends were now his enemies. The same competitors he once plotted with spread rumors that left him vulnerable inside. He tasted loneliness in its rawest form. Meanwhile, the company I thought I had lost began to rise again. The workers loyal to me, not to Ethan, returned with renewed energy. Clients who had left came back. Investors who doubted me before now saw me as a symbol of resilience. Ironically, Ethan's betrayal had become the fuel that made my empire stronger than ever. But here's the twist: karma did not only strike Ethan. It struck me too, in a different way. I realized that in my obsession with building wealth, I had neglected something more fragile, teaching my son the meaning of loyalty, of love beyond material success. I had given him everything money could buy, but perhaps I had failed to give him the one thing he needed most, the wisdom of patience and humility. So, I made a decision. I rewrote my will not to disown Ethan forever, but to ensure that if he ever changed, if he ever found redemption, there would still be something waiting for him. Not wealth, but a trust fund dedicated to helping others, a foundation in his name. A chance for him to earn forgiveness by serving those in need. As I signed the papers, I whispered, "Trust is earned, my son. And maybe, one day, you will earn it back." The world thought I had destroyed my son in court. But the truth? I left the door open for him, not as a father desperate to restore what was lost, but as a man who believed even the deepest betrayal cannot erase blood. And that, I realized, was my true revenge, not to see him suffer, but to let karma teach him the lessons I never could. Because the greatest empire is not made of steel or dollars. It is made of legacy. And my legacy will outlive us both. Years have passed since the trial. My empire stands taller than ever, but it is no longer built for my pride, it is built for purpose. Schools, hospitals, and community projects now carry my family's name. Sometimes, I walk through those halls and wonder if Ethan ever visits one day, will he see that his name isn't just tied to betrayal, but to something greater? I don't know if we will ever reconcile. Maybe we won't. Betrayal cuts deep, and scars do not fade easily. But one thing I've learned is this: revenge is not about destroying the enemy. Revenge is about reclaiming your own power. And forgiveness? Forgiveness is not for them. It's for you. When my son tried to steal everything, I thought I had lost. But the truth is, I gained something priceless. I gained clarity. I gained the strength to fight back. And I gained the wisdom to understand that even when your own blood betrays you, you can rise higher than ever before. So, if you are listening to my story tonight, remember this. Trust is earned, not given. Wealth can be rebuilt, but respect and loyalty must be protected at all costs. And when life stabs you in the back, don't let bitterness eat you alive. Use that knife to cut a new path forward. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge is not their downfall. It is your survival.